Welcome everyone. Today is May 7th, and this is our monthly Kubernetes public steering meeting. My name is Maciej, and I'll be hosting today's call. We have Antonio, Patrick, and Sasha, and Ben joining me from the steering. We have also a couple of folks from the community joining. Feel free to add your name if I missed it or I haven't added it yet, or hopefully not, I made a typo. We don't have any particular updates from the CNCF that I'm aware of, unless someone else has any updates. Okay, hearing none. We can then jump over to the first topic that Ben brought up about governing board's representative should match steering committee terms. I believe this topic, as it currently stands, is resolved because we actually run the GB elections after last year Kubernetes steering elections. This way, we have new members picking the new governing board representative. That seat is up for 2 years. The one action item that is probably left over from somewhat related area is that I promised to write down the entire process, because so far we were basically just repeating the same steps that we've done and were based on previous emails that were sent to the steering and emeritus steering members. So my goal and my hope is that I'll write down and ensure that this process is properly documented for the next time we'll have to run it. It'll just be easier for everyone. So I don't know if folks have any questions or objections. If there are none, I believe we should be able to close this particular item.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, I don't think we've actually been having a problem with this. I think that it's actually good to have context, and I think that I don't think it's worthwhile to change the cycle. I think as long as we are confident in the person and they're communicating with us to make sure we gain the context and communicate our comments to the governing board, then this is working fine.
Okay, I'll make a note. I'm going to close this particular item after this call. The next topic was opened by Bob a year ago, and this was basically covering steering and potential interest of conflict of interest. I believe this was coming up roughly around the time when Bob was changing his position. I believe we have information about a maximal representation per employer for a steering to ensure that not any of the companies has the majority of the votes within the steering. If I remember correctly, that's 2 max per employer. I believe we have even a clause that is specifically ensuring that every single steering member takes the project over their employer as well. So I believe with all of those in place, we should be roughly covered. Not sure if anyone has any other opinions about what we might potentially be missing in the document that we should be adding, or I don't know.
I just want to clarify, it is 2 maximum, which is enough which is intended to be so you can't even swing a simple majority vote with in a particular organization, um, let alone something where we need like a complete majority. In some cases, we require a supermajority. But even for
Correct.
things that are everyday means where we just need a simple majority, you only have two of the um, five needed. And yes, the values document clearly states that we expect everyone working in the project to prioritize the project over their company's angle. But we especially expect this of steering, and the maximum representation is intended to make sure that it can't be perceived as it's still a risk anyhow.
And as a last resort, there's still an option for um to abstain from taking a vote or just hold on from commenting a particular situation or a particular issue that is at hand, which is totally reasonable approach as well if you don't want to be perceived one way or the other. Although I'm saying this is like the last resort. So I believe we should be roughly covered on all fronts.
I think the main reason this came up is this is one of the first times that there was some concern that people might perceive a conflict of interest existing. But I think we had already done quite a bit to prepare for that.
Mhm. Okay. Hearing no other comments, I'm gonna make a note to also close this particular issue after after the call with appropriate comments. Um, Ben, you're up next also with the SIG leads as voting CNCF maintainers.
So we've sent the email to the CNCF. It's been a little bit, and I haven't heard anything. I actually took a note this morning to check my spam to see if it like wound up in there or something. Um, but it should have gone to the steering mailing list anyhow, as our CC'd, and I don't see it there. So I think we'll probably need to send a follow up. I'm not sure how aggressive we want to be with that. It's a We asked for a pretty large set of changes. It hasn't been very long yet. It, it was submitted last week, but at some point we will need to ping the CNCF again to ask for an update on that.
You've mentioned that you're not seeing the email. I'm just looking at my steering email and it's there. It's from Monday 28th
Or
specifically.
sorry, not my message, a response.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I believe so. It's sent, um,
Hmm.
and it was sent last week. We've formally made the request now. That's all tied up, but we haven't seen the request acted on yet. So at some point we'll need to follow up if we don't see something.
I would probably just give it a couple weeks, like 2, 3 weeks, and then eventually follow up. We can also look at the past requests where we were sending individual steering members addition to the list to roughly see how long it takes. Um, I believe it was like somewhere between a week up to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I would rough.
My understanding is that they're intending to have a self-management platform later this year. Hopefully, we'll see if that actually ships. But right now, it's manual and it requires updating in many places. So it's reasonable that it might take a bit. Two or 3 weeks sounds like a good idea. Maybe let's try to make sure by the next meeting that will be on the long side of that, that we double check this one and make sure we've followed up if we haven't heard anything between us. I think that's probably the best way to make sure that we do actually follow up collectively. Just put it as a an agenda item for the next meeting.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll drop it there right away. Oh, I need to. I'll be creating the um I'll be creating this thing afterwards. I'll just make sure this is properly populated for the next time. Does anyone have any questions about the SIG leads chairs as voting CNCF maintainers? I believe we covered this topic so many times over the past couple of months by now that everyone are roughly aware of this topic. But yeah.
This has been a really long running project back to the last committee. It's been hard to drive the full consensus and then to collect the full set of emails. I wound up having to fix up a number of them manually, but we actually have tooling in place to make sure that there are no gaps in the future, that the appropriate information is filled in for any new lead entries, and we have all of them. And we have actually requested it now after like, I don't know, maybe a year or two at least of chipping away at this.
Okay. The next topic on the agenda is a request that came from DIMS a couple weeks back about whether we as a Kubernetes project should have a general guidance on using generative AI in the Kubernetes orgs, and that applies to pull requests, issues, blog posts, uh, doc updates, and whatnot. Um, I believe there are currently, and the discussion, if people are interested in looking through this particular issue, are two or three folded roughly. There is a section, and I remember that Ben was updating the links that we're throwing at people, especially the newcomers when opening their first PR, about the pull request process, which also explains and goes in details about the what we are expecting from pull requests. There is one section specifically about trivial edits. Um, but I'm guessing that the general question and then the request behind that particular original issue was, do we want to have a specific wording for generative AI? I believe the overall consensus is that we don't. At most, what we would want to add, and that's a question for the majority of people, is probably more wording around ensuring that people are carefully reviewing their PRs and making sure that they are providing value for the project and not are, I don't know, untested, unverified, uh, something like that. I don't know. I would love to hear from others if they get any chance to look through the links that are gathered in this issue. There was also a link in the Slack channel. I don't remember on which channel specifically. It might have been in the docs because Contribex was primarily focused on it. So it might have been Contribex channel, actually.
That thread is in Contravex.
Yeah. I believe Contribex had even two docs that they were discussing back and forth. That are linked in this thread. I don't know if we need to have explicit call out for AI. I don't think that's something that we would want to do. I believe Patrick was also of a similar opinion that at most we could um, build on top of the trivial edit section a little bit more. I don't know how others feel about it.
I think there's a couple separable problems to discuss.
Mhm.
One is like what we want, the other is how we like effectuate it. And even within what we want, there were a couple different things being concerned. The thread in Contrabex is mostly talking about like AI generated blog posts where the author may not have really understood what they're writing about and just spammed it. There's can fill up things. I've seen similarly, there's actually an ongoing discussion right now in r/Kubernetes, which a couple of the maintainers, including Tim Hawken and myself, moderate about like the volume of these that are getting spammed, the very low effort content, just totally 100% auto generated. That something like that got through into the blog. So that's why they were having that conversation is um, that don't want low effort auto generated posts. I think that's a little bit different from the code pull request problem where, I mean, actually, in both cases, you can have sort of assisted generated content as opposed to like fully. And so I think the problem here is around time waste dealing with low effort content and not around did you use this tool at all. Like if you just took an issue, fed it into some tool, and it auto generated something, you don't review it and you submit it, then that's not really helping us much. We could have done that as well. But if you have made a genuine effort and you have used some generative tooling in the process, I think that that's different. As far as like actually effectuating it, I agree with Patrick. I think maybe we could put something in the trivial edits part, but my concern is we put so much content in front of new contributors that while I don't mind someone adding something, I don't think it's going to do anything. There's just way too much stuff for people to read anyhow. Like it's a nice sentiment, I guess, but I don't think it changes anything. There was also some side conversation about like automated detection. I pointed out that if you have a system that can automatically detect generated content, that is like the perfect oracle for training the next model. There's no way to do this reliably. It's like the old plagiarism detectors or something. It's just going to have false positives on earnest attempts at contributing, and that's not helpful. And I don't think we want that tone in the project. We don't want to be like accusing people of this. The problem is when people submit large PRs that they haven't made a serious attempt around, and then we're spending time doing trying to check for all the bugs in the code that they never attempted. That, but I don't think there's an obvious fix. We can ask politely to not do that, but that assumes they even see this ask in our like wall of text.
I mean, even
Yeah.
if they are submitting the PR using an automated tool from start to end, they will not even look at whatever the bot will link them or comment that they should look at. And I believe the issue that you mentioned about docs being worried about low quality content being produced, then was specifically talking about similar issue where he struggled with one of the contributors opening PRs, which will basically thrown at AI. That thing generated the response. Uh, so after his review, he got another round, which was clearly, oh, someone just took the review comment, thrown this at an AI and expected an answer and submitted another round of reviews. Um, I believe I don't think we have a golden solution. I definitely agree that putting something more in the huge wall of text that we already have and forcing anyone, especially new contributors or first-time contributors, to go through all of them is definitely not tenable.
I think
Uh,
we could put a brief mention. I just don't know that it'll
um,
accomplish much.
I mean, on the other hand,
But it,
the trivial edits, one of the saved responses that I have because I don't want to look for this thing, that particular link is something that I'm very frequently personally using. And it's part of my saved replies on GitHub whenever I'm closing an issue because I'm seeing that this is a trivial edit. I'm just linking it there, and without even trying to compose the message because I know that it will give you the necessary information. This is a trivial edit. This is the link where we're describing the entire process, and I'm closing safely um, PRs like that. So if we put something like that, and we will be consistent with closing PRs and linking to the rules that we are setting in front of people,
I do think we have
that
to
changes
balance that a
this
little
too.
bit. A lot of people's first contributions are small fixes. I think
True.
if we looked at a lot of ours, we would find that our first PRs were not big. And like there's a balance. If we think it's
True.
always about if you think people are doing in earnest. I think originally when we added this, there was a problem with people gaming it where they would send like 100 individual PRs that were each one trivial edit that was clearly found by automation, and that's not very helpful to us. So the ask to like attempt to review the whole file makes sense. But if they have actually attempted to review the whole file and there aren't other things, we should still let them fix the file. I think that's the same problem here. People also raise that like with blog content, there are contributors where English isn't their primary language and they may be using machine tooling to help translate, and then it may sound like it was written by an AI, but it's just the like poor translation or something.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that's very I think it's a very bad stance to try to like auto flag them and say like, oh, we assume this, but you know, we can ask people like the trivial edit thing to please make sure that they've made a complete attempt. Um, there's one other big problem I think this teased out um, to put on people's mind. We don't actually have really any detailed policy for the GitHub moderation. We have fairly detailed docs for like
True.
Slack and so on. That is a gap that I think is actionable that we need to fix, and I filed a separate bug about. Um, we already have, before the latest in Gen AI, seen a lot of automated activity on GitHub. You may not have encountered it, but it's pretty common on repos like Test Infra. We get people trying out their bots and spamming the repo. And the GitHub management team actually already moderates this content up to and including banning accounts that are that appear to be doing automated spam. I mean, that even includes things like advertising links. But we don't really have that policy spelled out. And I think that's like that needs to be solved. And it is at least tangentially related here that, you know, if we want to change that policy, well, we need to write down what the policy is first.
Yeah, exactly. Especially that we even have guidelines for calendar, discuss, even the for the Kubernetes X account, there are guidelines. But we're missing a guideline for our primary medium where
Yeah.
the majority of the work is being done.
We do have some guidelines for things like the repos and how they should be named and created and so on, but we don't have guidelines for when we're going to ban accounts, what kind of content isn't permitted. Like that's missing. So somewhere in this thread, there's a link to an issue in Kubernetes community CCing the team that does do this moderation, starting a thread. I think we need to follow up with them, or maybe we should attempt to write it. I do think they've been doing a good job. So if possible, I would love to have like a first draft based on what they have been doing. Which, um, but it's, I mean, this needs to happen. So if we need to drive it, then we might need to do that.
Um, I believe just to make sure that we're not leaving this hanging in the air, uh, we should put a comment over here that that this topic was brought up today. during this call. So it is at least acknowledged that yes, this discussion took place, and we're leaning towards ensuring that there is a GitHub guidelines explicitly called out. We're not currently interested in specifying any detailed generative AI guidelines, but we can leave room uh, for SIGs.
I think before we do
To
that, we should
introduce
pause
those.
and like explicitly get input from others here. I think that, you
Mhm.
know, this is a touchy topic, and I want to hear from the rest of steering before we,
That,
you know, make a statement.
that was roughly where I was heading. Was like I'm gonna try to make a statement, and I'm gonna open the floor for everyone to say yes, this is a good direction or not. Patrick, I see you unmuted. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, I think I mostly agree with you guys. We don't need anything specific for AI generated. It's more about the intent and that people understand what we are submitting. Where we put that, I don't care too much, but it needs to be written down somewhere so that we can do a canned response to someone and point them towards those guidelines. Otherwise, it's up to the reviewers to come up with some wording and some ad hoc policy that they write down in a response when they decide to not review perhaps a PR anymore. So I'm definitely in favor of writing it down somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think we have to be careful with the language too. I think it's important that we remind people to not like make bad assumptions, and that you know, we like people can be making an earnest attempt, but we need some language around when it becomes clear that you're not really making an earnest attempt to work on this, and
Do
it's just auto spam.
do you think we have something similar for support when we send or check the support channels? I think there was a canned response for that. I remember Lubomir and
We have one for support channels. Yeah, we I forget where that is actually, but I've seen that
yeah,
as well. Like we
I
have some documentation about this is not appropriate for GitHub.
I think that's a good idea. I agree with Patrick's suggestion.
So maybe we have an action item to draft some language, possibly alongside the trivial edits content that can be used for this purpose.
I mean, theoretically, if you look at, there is examples of inappropriate content in the main communication guidelines. But I'm not 100% sure that
I,
this
I,
covers all the possible.
yeah, I think this is more similar to like the support forums comment or the trivial edits comment where you're specifically addressing, hey, it looks like you're asking for, I don't know, support for a product. Can you go ping them? Like not expecting maintainers to have to write that from scratch every time is
Mhm.
useful enough on its own. Um, and I think this one's particularly hard to write because you're sort of saying, hey, it doesn't look like you're trying. So I don't want people to have to write that from scratch. I'm also not excited to try to write it either, though.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because we will have to balance the attempt that someone is making without actually fully knowing how much time they actually invested into putting this thing. Because theoretically, it might look like it's a simple thing, but actually,
Yeah.
if you start digging it, the amount of time that they might have spent to be able to reproduce the problem and nail down where the solution might be, it's not always measurable in the lines or in
Yeah.
characters of in a PR.
That's where I look at the trivial edit one again, because the trivial edit one basically says, hey, you should make an attempt to clean up the rest of the file. So if you think this is happening, you could link to this, and then they can, if you're like you can politely ask like, "Hey, can you read this and follow the guidelines?" And then if they respond that they're following the guidelines, then you should proceed. I think that's similar with these PRs. The initial PR you can't really assume, but if you go through this review loop with them and it doesn't, and they're just like creating more broken, like non-compiling auto-generate code, something like that, then you link to this like, hey, this please don't spend our time on completely automated attempts, and with some reasoning about why that doesn't make sense.
Okay, so I'm seeing that.
Like trivial edits has the reasoning that we would like you to it helps us better if you will review the whole file instead of just sending us one little patch, because there is some cost to doing this. So if you could please take a moment yourself to make this a more helpful contribution, I think that is along the right direction. I'm just not sure how to convert that.
I wonder how we could actually improve the trivial edits rather than inventing entirely new one. Improve the trivial edits with
Well, I think the bigger concern is the opposite, though, right? Like in Dan's case, it was a non-trivial PR, so it costs a lot of effort to review, but it turned out that it was like not very well written and had lots of bugs, and so like it's like
true. I know what you're saying.
like that like it's sort of the opposite, right? The problem isn't that you tried to fix everything. The problem is that you tried to fix everything by just throwing a machine at it and didn't follow up.
It's even worse because the PR I was taking with time on that looks great, right? Until you start to realize, oh, what this thing is doing here. And then you go to the page, oh, this doesn't make sense. So maybe you eat like 5, 10 minutes of review until you realize, oh, this doesn't make any sense. But the code looks great, right? And the person sending it was interacting. Oh, let me add the review about it. So
I
yeah,
think
it's super fast.
that's a really good point to capture it. And if we read this, like one of the things that makes these a problem is that if you use an LLM to generate a pull request, it inherently looks about right, but that doesn't mean that it is right. And so it's even harder to spot where it's wrong because like I mean that's what these text generators do is they predict something that looks the most like what it would be. So it looks like you wrote the code
And
and then you have to find the small flaws in it.
if we put an LLM reviewer, will they loop between them? And and I don't know. It's crazy.
Okay. In the interest of time, because I know that there's one more topic from Arno of a similar matter, so we're not going to leave AI behind. I believe we have an agreement about we want to have a new section that is somewhat similar in wording to what we have within the trivial edits, which will be targeted at PRs that are potentially LLM generated, but we don't have to specifically talk about LLMs, which will be a point that people can, a link that people can just use, reviewers specifically, when closing APR and saying just this is the reason why I'm closing it, without everyone reinventing the wheel and the same answer over and over again. And that hopefully will allow people to have a better understanding of what the requirements from the project side of are. I believe I've seen Sasha +1 did. Patrick was in favor. Based on what you, Ben, and Antonio are saying, we're roughly in an agreement. So I can make that kind of a comment in that particular issue. Okay.
Do we have an owner who is trying to come up with wording? Otherwise, we'll just make the comment if we want to write the text, but nothing will happen. I can give it a try. Yeah. Well, I can try. It will be awful, and you can all criticize it and try to come up with better wording. But I can try to start.
We'll use ChatGPT to iterate on it.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I'm supposed to say Gemini.
It's all the same at the end of the day. Patrick to create the initial messaging. Cool. Arno.
Yes, sir. So I will start with the context where we kind of trying to bootstrap an infra where we want to leverage deep learning to do a few things, mostly address potential problem discovered in the maintainer experience. And in order to do that, we don't want to build our own language model, we want to consume the existing one. One of the things we notice is more like the most recent LLMs out there are basically under specific licensing, which means you need to sign an agreement to do that, to basically consume. If I pick Llama 4, you want to consume that on, I would say, a public model garden like Vertex AI, there's an agreement to be signed. So there's a legal matter to this, and I want to open a case at CNCF to basically look at I would say the problem, because basically we don't exactly know which kind of license we need to agree on. And I think, yeah, Kate and Fred need to basically sign agreement on different cloud providers and service provider in order to do that. So I think this is more like I want basically some kind of input from steering before I talk to CNCF about this.
So what do you license, Arno?
Basically, there are like specific license agreement for the LLMs host on the different platform we want to consume. If I pick, for example, like I say, Llama 4 from Meta has a specific license release with the model.
Is that true when you use, like, I don't know, again, like Gemini or ChatGPT or something like that? I know that the Meta ones have come up before, and they have a pretty particular license that looks difficult. What about other options?
That's the problem. It's more like we need to evaluate it. We need to benchmark multiple LLMs before we basically decide to pick one before to use. I mean, that's
I
one
think
thing
the
is like,
difficult licenses should be one of the reasons not to pick one.
Okay.
okay.
Can we step back and first, to people that are not fully familiar with the situation, paint the picture why we're trying to pick an LLM and how this is being used by Cube and
Mm.
what we're discussing
Hold on. I will put the doc in the chat. So there's like multiple problem regarding maintainer experience, and I think Justin reached out to the community about with this document trying to basically, it was like one pager where we describe the problem, and we believe that using AI we can solve those problems. We don't want to solve all the problem, but we want to tackle a specific one to begin with. And I think CAP review is the one thing we want to add. We want to try to address using AI. So in that context, the thing is we want to basically be able to look at different models so we can benchmark. And the model with open weight or license, I would say simple licensing, are basically limited in numbers and not performant enough for our needs. So we need to be able to evaluate different one. Otherwise, we're gonna end up building a new LLM, and I don't think that's like the road we want to take. Because there's like the first thing we should do is basically be able to evaluate a LLM against the task we want to basically we want to achieve. That's like the first thing. In order to do that, we need to basically be able to consume different LLMs like Yamatree, Gemini, Mistral.
So we actually discussed this in Cicade Semper recently,
Yeah.
and the feedback was to avoid having a direct link to a particular model and to use an API like the OpenAI API because of the CNCF has clearly established policy around permissible licenses, and these are clearly not permissible. They're restrictive in ways that the CNCF doesn't ordinarily permit. I think also any particular usage will need to follow up with contracts to like, okay, running any sort of automation. There were a lot of ideas in the doc you linked, and most of them weren't clearly related to using a tool like this.
Yeah. I don't basically in the document we don't want to tackle all the problem at once. If basically that's the like the one thing. The second thing is like the CNCF policy doesn't cover everything. That's why there's like a gray area about this. Because if I pick I would say if I pick, for example, models with the knowledge distillation, which is mostly a combination between, I would say, Yamatree and maybe Quen model. Is it possible to do that, for example? Because the policy cover the foundation models, basically things like basically build like specific models. But if you basically want to pick specialized model doing specific things, how we cover this from a legal perspective. And I think that's where like the policy is not really clear about this.
I think we've gotten a little bit of ahead of ourselves in assuming that we need to use any particular model and that the project will directly depend on them. If you have tooling in the project that just uses a generic API that doesn't care about the backend, then you can prototype locally with different models yourself if you're comfortable with the license. If you have a specific one that we think we actually definitely need to use for some useful purpose, then I think we should go through it. But this is going to be a very heavyweight request to the CNCF, and it's pretty clear why their license policy includes the license they have to be permissive licenses. I don't think we should be taking a direct dependency on a non-permissively licensed project. We avoid that intentionally so that everyone can participate and contribute to them. For example, if you make an AGPL tool a direct dependency, then I know that Googlers will not be able to participate or touch this, right? That's why the CNCF has the license policy they have. And there are a lot of options that other than this. Also, you may or may not actually need one depending on how you're using it and how directly linked it is. Again, in Kid Saber, when we talked about this, the answer was to not use a particular model directly. And I don't understand why we can't do that.
I don't say we can do that. I basically say there's a possibility this approach is not enough to consume the model because we don't basically it really depends on basically what we're trying to achieve. And I don't know if we pick a specific model is gonna be efficient enough to basically address the different problem we have, like CAP review.
We're close to
Like,
time, so I'm going to stop and let others for. But my last comment on this is I don't think we should make such a heavyweight request while there's so many open questions on our end. I think
okay.
if we know more specifically how we intend to use it and why we need to use a particular model, then we can explain to the CNCF why they need to have legal review this and try to grant us an exception or something. If you look at the link for the docs, there's more details on this. I think that this is like an expensive thing to call for. They have to go all the way to having a vote called for in the CNCF charter if they're going to make an exception to the licensing policy. We should not request that lightly, and we don't even know how we're planning to do this yet.
Okay.
I'll just throw my 2 cents into the discussion. I believe a lot, and this will probably follow Ben's thoughts. I believe a lot of those tools will be executed on the contributor machine, at least for quite some time. I'm not expecting us to have an online solution where everyone will be able to use it anytime soon. In which case, as long as we will follow the OpenAI API, we should be fine with users just using whatever their provider for the LLM is, and just ensuring that we are generic with regards to communication. So yeah, I believe there are also projects which allow you to transparently swap the backends, which could also be potentially in a viable solution. And I'm talking about Open Router. I was looking at this thing recently where they basically provide you an API, and it doesn't matter which models you're running in the back. So yeah, just a little bit of food for thought, because yes, as Ben mentioned, we are slowly getting towards the end. If anyone wants to speak up, yeah, Antonio, go ahead. Or Anna.
I didn't say that.
Arno?
Oh no, I will just follow Ben's recommendation. I think basically the one thing is more like the concern was more like, because there are thousands of models out there, and if you want to try some, we have concerns about basically licensing, but in some case you want to use those. It's more like a shortcut, basically. Pick a model recent enough so that simplify basically what we try to achieve. And that's why basically it's more like a legal thing, because if I pick the more recent model, they are under specific licensing.
I think don't ship anything in the repo that references any model, but you can use whatever you want locally. And once we have more specifics and we have a good idea of why, we'll need to use this versus like a managed offering or something like that, then we can follow up with CNCF Legal. Also, just for people that are catching this call but maybe haven't seen the prior ones, there's also a strong context here that any sort of automated behavior will be with explicit approval from Contravex before we actually run it on anything public, as opposed to like, local development or something like that. Um, you know, there's a whole conversation for that.
Cool.
Okay, I'll finish typing afterwards. One last thing before closing the call. Who is interested in running this call in a month? Patrick did it a couple of past times, I believe twice by now. I've been doing this for a little bit longer. Do we have volunteers to do it the next time?
Then I will take it.
Antonia. Perfect. Cool.
I might be out.
With that, I'm gonna finish the call. Thank you very much, all, and see you next time. Bye, folks.
Bye.
Thanks, folks. Bye.